Okay, hello, Tyler Bryden here. Hope everything's going well. I'm all fired up on chai. Got a workout in this morning, feeling good. The hair looking brutal, though I'm sorry for this fluff that's going on. You'll see a cut. I think I'm going to go to Turkey. I'm going to get incisions and all this stuff. I'll be on the Turkish hairlines. I'm seeing all the memes about that. Got in the steam room. I'm a little sweaty under here, so we're keeping it shot up high. And man, what a week of stuff do we have to go through here. We'll jump right into it at the start because it's on top of mind. Trump-Vance-Zelensky, wild moment. I watched that live on Bloomberg and was just in shock. So pull up a couple things on that. Won't make you watch it all. We had the story localized into Canada a little bit. Brookfield management and Kearney in this business that he moved from Canada to the U.S. right before he started running for prime minister. Got some interesting data on both the top issues in Canada and then some new polling. And then we've got a provincial election here that just happened. We're getting super local now, but pretty interesting. And Doug Ford, spoiler, wins again. And has had lots of interaction with Trump, the Canada hat and everything going on. We've got Trump acknowledging Pierre. We've got more tariff stuff. There's a depression coming in Canada. The markets alone have been volatile. And then we got Kearney is a liar. We got some memes there. There's a few other things. That's a lot on the docket. I see lots of links here. As always, I'll share those in the video and we'll have a good time going through some of the biggest stories of the week. And obviously from a perspective of myself, who's interested in politics, I'm a Canadian here. Lots going on Canada. And I think Canada, just with some of the in proximity to the US, some more attention being placed on it, as well as the Trudeau step down new election coming up. Obviously love tech, I love money, investing money, following the markets, all that good stuff. So that's the perspective I'm looking from. And even in the last few weeks, as I've posted some more videos, probably one of my more striking places that I've taken right now is I just don't like this Carney guy. And so I've been posting some videos about this, and it's been interesting to see the commentary on it, that I'm a mega conservative voter, all this stuff. And so that's the first time I've experienced that. I do try to look at it from both sides and have been a progressive voter my whole life, but have seen this shift culturally and then obviously the outcomes here in Canada. And so that's changed my perspective a bit. And I think naturally you just get older, you become maybe more conservative in certain elements. I would say still socially and culturally, there's a lot of progressive elements to me, but I'm also a business owner. I've been through some cycles of that, and even just having a financial model and trying to understand, like, I'm going to run out of money here, or I need to make money, or my expenses are more than what we're bringing in. All that starts to ingrain this worldview into you because you realize that cash is the blood, the source of life for you, obviously as a business. And I know people are struggling with this idea of looking at the government just as a business right now, but there's obviously huge fundamental problems across many countries, across the whole world right now that need to be addressed, and that at least attempts at addressing that are obviously creating some friction and some tension. And we saw that, segue, Tyler, front and center with this Trump and Vance and Zelensky incident that took place Friday, February 28th. So what happened? I think a lot of us have seen at least some of the clips. I was watching Bill Maher, and he took these hypercuts of the moment and some pretty crazy photos and some clips, and obviously the memes that are coming out of this. I will say there's a pretty big rhetoric online right now about people who are watching the clips that have been curated. And I will say there was a very intense moment, especially here, Vance, this intervention, and then the pushback from Zelensky. I haven't watched this full video, but apparently there's a 40 minutes lead up to this moment, which is obviously what many of us saw and have hyper focused on, where Trump, Vance were much more cordial. And it seems like there was some misalignment that, of course, there's probably misalignment across this whole thing, but at least the public show of this was going to be unity. And that's obviously not what happened. There was Zelensky pushing back. And again, I fully understand like his perspective on this. First of all, it seems like the US forced them into this whole thing. What I didn't know was some of the greater history about denuclearization. Wow, that's a big word. In the 1990s, which then led them to being relatively defenseless. Beside Russia, there was Russia who came in and started this whole thing. Obviously, there's the narrative around NATO and all these pieces here. And then there's the jokes about Zelensky and who he was before this. But at the same time, He is the leader of a country where they have lost a lot of people to this war. It's a devastating thing that I think everyone wants to end. And I guess Zelenskyy here has some valid concerns about, okay, if we go into a ceasefire, how do we ensure that Russia doesn't attack us again? All these pieces there, those all make sense. So like, I understand the view that Zelenskyy has and his own also respectable nationalist agenda to make sure that Ukraine can stay strong and continue to be a country. Now, I do think that Trump and Vance are also right. It wasn't them particularly who subsidized this, who have sent this money. It's America as a whole. And Trump called out Biden for being stupid for doing this and that this would have never happened. So there's that whole narrative around it. But then just speaking back to that part about the deficits and all these challenges, it makes sense that Trump, Vance want to stop sending huge amounts of money to Ukraine. That's why this whole mineral thing was done. And I do think there is this more honorable piece that Trump talks about where he just doesn't want people to die anymore. So I think that push is a valid thing. And Vance also brought up like these videos, which I saw a bunch of them highlighted today, which are crazy, where you're just walking down the street in Ukraine, you're a male, and you're just dragged into a van to be sent off to the front lines. Like, this is not a situation that anyone wants to be in. And I know there are a lot of people watching from their perch, safe in their country, talking about this defense and protectionism, and we have to defeat Russia and all this stuff. But I tell you, if I was in that situation where I'm scared that I'm going to get dragged through the street into a van so I could go to the front line and get attacked by Russian drones, which are being generated at a massive pace, I'm going to have some concerns. And there was this narrative of, say, thank you, which then I think Zelenskyy went a little crazy after on X, just thank you to everyone. Overall, there's such a huge divergence in the response to this. And I have a couple examples of that. In the end, seems like it was a pretty terrible show for everyone involved. And I know there was a lot of Americans saying, oh, we're so glad to see someone taking this stand and putting America first. And like, I can understand that view. At the same time, I do agree with this, like 2-on-1 English as a second language with Zelenskyy that just looked pretty horrible on a world stage. People use the term bullying. I don't know if I fully agree with that, but it was pretty intense. And a lot of starting to yell and talk over each other. Apparently, Zelenskyy called Vance a bitch, which I didn't know about that. What does that mean? Zelensky's kicked out of the White House. And some people are talking about the art of the deal. He wanted to come back. Trump says no. And this is part of the whole thing. But again, a lot of commentary after about this. This has never been something seen publicly. Maybe these conversations happen in the back room behind closed doors, but this was pretty intense to watch on a world stage. And Trump didn't let it go. Obviously, the memes, the AI fights, and some commentary about, again, watch the whole thing, which I haven't done myself. So I might be, I guess, providing my insights, or I don't know if they're insights, my perspective or my analysis, and it could be completely off because I haven't been able to take the time to watch it. Now, we did get some reaction shots from Zelensky's ambassador. Memes again. We've got Zelenskyy 5'3" and an attitude, which, oh man, this one will never seem to disappear. And then I just had a couple examples of that divergent. And again, I have no endorsement of who these people are on Twitter, but one side of it, we have a strong president and vice president. Thank God for JD Vance and his statement there. And I do appreciate his interjection. And then we have the opposite. We got Jagmeet, Canadian, saying, no Donald Trump at the next G7 meeting. What is this guy doing? This guy got his pension and he's fired up. And I just don't know how anyone can take this guy seriously. And even what he's trying to do. It's honestly gross at this point. We've got, again, another perspective from the Canadian, someone who's pretty popular here in Canada, talking about Vance berate Zelenskyy on national TV, which is a lot of the European perspective there as well. And I understand, again, if you see those clips, how you could arrive at that conclusion. And then we've got the errors today again. So more of an assessment of it. Shows up in costume, not a suit. Doesn't understand his standing in the world. Talking about, there was this layered threat about you're going to feel it. You're safe across the ocean right now, but wait until you're threatened. And definitely that was one of the accelerants in that conversation. And then continuing to demand more money. Pretty crazy moment. Again, I just was in shock watching it. I almost needed to turn it off. So I couldn't imagine being in that room and being part of it, knowing this was going to be watched on a world stage and there's going to be a moment in history. And I was watching Bloomberg over lunch as it was happening, and they were waiting for the playback of this, and they were starting to get word from reporters in the room, and it was like, apparently this is not going well, and voices are raised. So we're live in conversation there on Bloomberg, waiting for the tape to come in, and once the tape came in, it did not disappoint, and you saw Trump at the end said, wow, I guess this made for great TV, which I guess is always in his mind in some perspective. But I do think at the end, he was not happy with how this went. And obviously a big part of his platform was to end these wars. We've seen the peace deal, which seems very fragile in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas, but Ukraine and Russia being a big one. I do feel like the Russians watching this are probably pretty happy. A lot of chaos created from that meeting. I do think there are these real world consequences of at least the perspective of people watching this and seeing what feels like U.S. abandoning Ukraine. And that was a point a couple of the panelists raised on Bill Maher last night, which, I mean, I've talked about in previous videos, but they did a great job laying that out. So that was pretty fascinating and something that I've thought as a Canadian here with all these tariffs and everything about reliance on the U.S. is becoming very scary thing, and so more diversification is required, and this could be a situation where the U.S. in the end may regret all this isolationism, which is leading to countries no longer relying on them and having to rely on partners that maybe aren't the most ideal partners. And the examples that the panelists were using on Bill Maher was China, unfortunately, which is obviously not the ideal situation for America and can be counterintuitive and conflict with this whole mission that they're on and their continuous railing that China is the main enemy. Also, Trump had previously called Zelenskyy a dictator, which is probably never a good thing to start that conversation. I feel like that's not a good base level setting to then come into this conversation. There's been some other interesting pieces about this mineral deal. Obviously, that didn't get signed, and that it's not even worth anything in the end anyways. But overall, it's just a pretty wild event to watch. A terrible situation overall. So many people have died, and unfortunately, in my own X feed, I got pulled into one video seeing some of the frontline stuff that's happening. And you watch these videos of drones just chasing either Russians or Ukrainian soldiers, and it's just technology versus people. And you're just put out there in just a piece of flesh that's getting destroyed by a drone. What is this? Why are we doing this? And I think that is a way a lot of people feel, and they just want to see this war come to an end. And I know there's all these questions around, what if the Ukraine has to secede to Russia? What do they do next? I guess this is why I'm not in politics. This is why I'm not a military general or any of these things, because in my mind, avoiding war and military conflict is just like the most important thing, because I just don't think people should be dying all the times who don't fully support even what's taking place. But you run into these scenarios and moments in time where I guess it almost feels like there's no other option. Then the story and some of the history here shows that might not necessarily have been true, and a lot of this pain and suffering could have been avoided, and just generations of Ukrainians and Russian people just absolutely destroyed. That's such a crazy thing. Okay, so I want to reset a little bit. That was a tough conversation, a conversation with myself. I hope that you're listening. I'm just ranting here. But about this interesting story this week. New leader of the Liberal Party, and that de facto, ipso facto, become the next prime minister. And the leader right now is this guy, Kearney. The background on the story is Kearney talked about how he was no longer part of the board when Brookfield, which is a major company, $750 billion in assets, unanimously voted to move their headquarters out of Canada to New York. And so he wrote to shareholders urging them to approve the move on December 1st, 2024. He said he had stepped down. Turns out he hadn't stepped down. And this was this moment where they realized, first of all, this guy lies. And the bigger story or belief around this is that he doesn't have Canadians' interests at mind. Now, there was this interesting moment here where this guy explains that his role as the board director of that company is in the best interest of shareholders. So it was his job to then push that company to US because that is the best for shareholders. In a way, that's a pretty big self-own, because the government who's been in charge for the last 10 years, 5 years, half of that time, who has been run by Carney, is saying Canada is not the place to have your company. You should move it to the US. So they have created this situation where that is the right decision. And I can understand how that is the right decision based on everything that Canada's done, but they were the one who graded it. So it's such a wild moment for this guy to try to rationalize this and not realize the ironic self-own of this. And apparently this company itself is doing some pretty nasty things. Peru is suing this because they've done some horrible things to poor people. I don't know enough to like layer these accusations, but it's fascinating to see that they were operating in a poor way, which look under the hood in a lot of companies. Obviously that's the piece. Now, another interesting part of this thread is that years ago, Pierre and Kearney had a little square off virtually and talked about shutting down pipelines in Canada while he invests in pipelines, Brazil, United States, and continues to push this zero carbon footprint agenda while he's profiting off it in other jurisdictions. So just another continued pattern of Kearney. And this is why I love the internet, the memes. They came and it was Kearney is a liar. And all these started to emerge. So there he is. He invented the iPhone. He was the one who discovered fire. He was the one who provides Churchill with the war-winning advice during the Battle of Britain. We would all be German if it wasn't for Kearney. He landed this plane in the Hudson River in 2009. I love this one. Don't even need an image. Mark Carney now says he was in Tiananmen Square with Tim Walz when Brookfield Asset Management decided to move its Canadian headquarters to New York City. Tim Walz, a little U.S.-Canadian connection there. We've got him, the longest shot in Iraq. And there's the picture of the two buddies. In many ways, I talk about my effort to try to look at both sides here. I've done enough videos ranting about Kearney already, but just something about this situation, how he's been involved previously, his history, it just gives me this existential dread inside that I haven't felt before. And I know, for example, Americans have felt that about Trump. They also felt that about Hillary Clinton and then Kamala. And these moments in time where it feels like you're on a divergent path as a country or even a world. And I do feel like this is one of those moments here in Canada. If, for example, the Liberal Party clings onto power in some way through some mechanism, that's a dark place to be. Or even if there is an election and I would say there's a coalition majority through the NDP and Liberals, it can be a dangerous path for Canada to be on. And I'm not a person who sits here and says, oh, okay, I think the Conservatives are going to solve everything. Pierre is this Jesus figure who's going to come back and save Canada. I think there's too many fundamental problems there. But I think at a core, there is a directional shift that's required in the country. And there's two paths we can go down. And in previous instance, back in my Bernie bro day, I would say this socialistic WEF path that Kearney wants to go on is not that bad of a thing and take care of people, all of that. And now maybe a less naive person that I am, I just don't see that as the right path forward. And with all the problems and challenges with capitalism and this more Western world, it just seems like that is a better path we're on in the fork in the road that is happening right now. And so where are Canadians right now? This is interesting. There's some new polling that came out now. Some big divergence in these polls shows Liberal taking the lead for the first time in almost 4 years. And Trump coming into power, the chaos that's come from that. And then a lot of people, Chrystia Freeland on Bill Maher last night, labeling Pierre as maple syrup MAGA has done some damage to the Conservative Party and their projections in this election. And does Kearney win and then come into power and call an election right away? Or does he delay this until October 2025 or even through some apparently mechanisms into 2026? And what happens in that time? Some people say, hey, Kearney's going to get, the more he's exposed, the worse it is for him. While other people think the opposite. And so this is a 28-point swing in under 2 months. A seeming conflict polymarket, which has become a big indicator beyond a lot of things of what's truly happening, showing, yes, there is a drop. Conservatives are no longer the majority, but still highly likely that Pierre is going to win this race. And then we've got one from Abacus, a recent poll here as well, too. This one showing the Conservatives up and that it's a majority government. So what is taking place in these polls? It seems so volatile right now. A negative impression of Kearney starts to rise. And I do think there is more and more messaging. This Brookfield story is just one of them. These WBF ties, these Epstein ties, all of these things are starting to come out and percolate across X and then a little bit more into the mainstream. But what is even the mainstream anymore? And from my perspective, I see a very stark contrast between the people that I spent time with, the more business crowd, business owner, entrepreneur type, or freedom, build, capitalism. But then I have my wonderful people who I all love, who are much more NDP, liberal, safety nets. People are hurting in society, and it's just such a stark contrast. I haven't seen it like this before. It makes me nervous, makes me sad. What I don't like is I'll put myself more and more on that trajectory of the conservative side, and it scares me. Sometimes it doesn't scare me recording these videos, but I know that I have some good friends who have very different views, and I question if they watch my videos, which I know they probably don't. Would they dislike me? Would they not be able to be friends with me anymore? That's the kind of stuff that's happening right now, and that's a sad place to be. And I thought, just to layer this on, this was another part of that poll from Abacus talking about what are the most important issues facing Canada right now, and they have to select 3. So the rising cost of living, still huge lead, 61%. Donald Trump and his administration with all these tariff threats and everything, that's following. It's not close, and it's interesting. It's a drop. Both of these have dropped slightly. Healthcare, which is a huge issue, that's also showed up in our provincial election as a big issue in Ontario. Housing and affordability, the economy can be bundled. These 3 can be bundled and are top of mind. Immigration, climate change, up. Interesting. Crime and public safety, which I know more and more people feel that way in a low trust society, that's also up. Job security and unemployment, down. Interesting. Inequality and poverty, China and Russia, +2. Chinese election interference, which has been a big issue in Canada, but it's dropped. And then Indigenous reconciliation with +1 there. So when you run the gamut on this, a lot of this stuff is pretty unifying across both parties right now, but we view it in such different ways based on what party or side, left or right wing, that we feel on, where many of these things are core issues that all people want to see resolved and feel the pain and suffering from. And if I was to hone on one, Donald Trump and his administration, I think part of that is politically charged, but I think even if you're, say, a conservative and you're running a business or you're thinking about the business community in Canada, you can be in fear from Donald Trump and these tariff threats, and things start to bounce around here. March 4th seems to be when they're coming into effect. Trump says no progress by Canada in combating fentanyl. We have seen some stories about some big busts, and if they knew about these all the time, why wasn't this happening before? I do think this question is very clear. How is he measuring progress? And this isn't truly what he wants. He seems to want Canada as a state. He seems that this is a big win. There's other thoughts around this is about Russia and China up in the Arctic now. As the Arctic defrosts, all these minerals get exposed, and there's also pathways for travel. He just seems to hate Trudeau, which I understand. But either way, it's a scary time no matter what side you're on. And the fear here is that this can absolutely destroy Canada. And Canada not doing so well anyways, with a decline in 2024. Canada's a mess. And even our Bank of Canada with some pretty stark words. And across these 2 clips, what he's saying is that tariffs are going to lead to inflation, and it handcuffs them from just continuing to lower rates, because I believe, like the US, they have this dual mandate where they want to control inflation and unemployment. But if inflation is too high and too sticky, it's a difficult path for them to just cut rates. And then, of course, there's divergence from the interest rate environment in Canada and then the US, and there'll just be continued weakening of the Canadian dollar. So we're in a dangerous place right now. And if he's just publicly saying it like this with no mincing of words, he's setting us up for a very difficult time. And I feel like that's the way that it's heading in Canada. There's no COVID-style relief package. And there is the famous, we're going to keep rates low for a long time. That's what got Monica and I with our house and that view and the variable rate mortgage that screwed a lot of people, and that rush into housing, that overinflated houses, and that's starting to fall. But maybe this is also the scenario that he has to cut rates further, that the government has no choice but to subsidize these losses from these tariffs. And immigration has to open back up, and we're back to 2021. So overall, a very tumultuous time right now. Crazy week in the stock market too, with some huge swings in bonds, and then just the market as a whole. The S&P, you can see very choppy, down 1.3% in the past 5 dates, narrowly up year to date. It's still not so bad, all things considering, but what we've been used to in these last 2 years has put us in quite an expectation state. But you can see a lot of choppiness, and then right at the end, just a little spike. It was looking like a pretty dark day. Now, end of the month, maybe end of RSP season in Canada. I don't know if it's the same thing in the US, but all of a sudden everything just spiked at the end of the day. So it made it look a little better in the end. But I think there is an overall fear profile that we are seeing, and you can literally see that in the fear and greed index, extreme fear right now with all the volatility, the tariffs, that Trump and Zelenskyy and Vance thing didn't help the situation, EU tariffs, Canada tariffs, Mexico tariffs, a lot of chaos. And I got to admit, a huge source of this is coming from the USA and its administration. And I think in a lot of ways, there's support for what he's trying to do, the Doge efforts, the balancing the budget, if that's truly what they're trying to accomplish. But the uncertainty and the volatility is creating a lot of fear. And I think the same goal could be done in a much more efficient, calculated, predictable way that would make the market much more comfortable, that would make the whole world and economy and companies more comfortable. And so while there's support, I think there's more and more straining of the way that this administration is going about that. And that's something that I feel and see personally, especially as a Canadian. A little bit of a Canadian and an even more local note. Trump, during this time, Pierre did get brought up, and he said Pierre is not a MAGA guy, which has been a big part of the liberal narrative. So an interesting moment. Pierre had a good moment of responding. It is true. I am not MAGA. I am for Canada first and Canada always. Now, there was some debate around his response to the Ukraine, his willingness to continue funding that when a lot of Canadians don't feel that way. And I think there is more and more criticism of Pierre as we get closer to this election. And as Trudeau fades into the background, the anti-liberal vitriol generated by Trudeau starts to then disintegrate and then require more focus on truly who do we want for the next leader of Canada and what is the path that we're on. We did see an example of this week. This is super localized now, but here in Ontario, we had our provincial election, and Doug Ford came early in winter. A lot of criticism around this idea that coming in winter, cold weather, reduces voter turnout here, and also there's some investigations going on to some of his conduct, but said out, it's time for me to have an early election, see is there a mandate for me to continue this fight against Trump, and a lot of rallying calls around that. So you can see, spoiler, thank you Ontario, he won. Now he didn't win because Doug Ford is a great leader. He won because Liberals in the NDP suck. They're horrible candidates. I personally have a lot of beef with Doug Ford. His focus on alcoholism is a terrible thing. I just don't truly understand why you want to push poison to people in every way possible. I just don't think this is a good thing to do. And he's this old school mentality that alcohol is cool. It's fucking not cool, man. And I just don't understand why this is such a big thing that he's pushing. He's literally costing Canadians millions, if not billions of dollars by making it happen earlier. It's a ridiculous thing. And I have a lot of hatred towards alcoholism and then Doug Ford agenda. He's also done some horrible things at Ontario Place with this contract that costed a ton of money. I don't fully understand a bunch of these pieces, but it's done serious damage to healthcare. I don't think all of this is his fault. There's huge immigration levels that's put stress. There's an aging population, and it's hard to get people to come to Canada who want to do this when they can go to the US and earn way more. So even with my feelings towards him, you put the vote in third straight majority, Doug Ford still in power. And you can see Paul Mitchell's note. This is this Ontario Place that have talked about there's prime farmland that's going to be paved over. There's a greenbelt scandal, no rent control, and a very clear message from a lot of people in the population that Doug Ford is not a great option, but that there's no great option. Found a post from myself about the election in 2018, and you can see baby Bryden talking about, look at this baby face there that's going on. There's his speech here at the end after the victory. I'm not going to subject you to that. And the memes about Ontario voters being stupid, feeling of a lot of people waking up and seeing Doug Ford still in power. And then the other side of that, if Doug Ford wins this election, everyone in Ontario will die again for the third time. He must be stopped. The votes are in. He was not stopped. Doug Ford remains in power in Ontario. So with that being said, crazy week. A lot of stuff going on. I've lost my technology and all this AI stuff that I used to. I'm just swamped by politics and everything that's going on in the world. Just so I can have some honoring of that. Two interesting things about the Sesame voice model. I don't see Toby Lupke talk about other companies. I'm not sure if he's talking his book here, but about this conversational voice demo, which is apparently mind-blowing. I'll put this in the notes if you want to check this out. And then there was this other video that went a little viral this week.
How can I help you?
And it's about AIs basically realizing that their AIs talking to each other, and then they switch to a superior audio signal to communicate with lower latency. And I'll just play this for a second. There you go. So robots communicating with each other, agents communicating in a much more intuitive, faster way. We can decode this, which is interesting. You can see on the screen there, but it may be a glimpse at the future where it's just agents talking to agents there. So I slipped it in a little bit of technology. I finished the show dark, thank God. It was eating up my dreams. It was eating up my life. 8.7. It was a great show and worthwhile watching, but man, that first season was terrifying for me at least. And it was a beautiful series through time travel, thriller, emotional, a fantastic piece of television. I almost couldn't keep watching after the first season, to be honest. It was too dark. The name of the show is dark, but I'm glad I persevered through. And now that I've seen the final episode, I closed this puzzle in my mind, and I was able, I think, for the first time, get to sleep. That's obviously pretty intense when a show can take over like that, but it shows the quality. And you needed to watch that show, and you were just glued to that screen and processing every single second of it because it was so intense and compelling. So if there's something like that you're looking for, this is a worthwhile choice. Appreciate my wife pushing me through. I thought I'd lost it for a minute. And then of course we got Severance, watched the most recent episode. A lot of hype. Personally, I'm still inconclusive on the show. It's definitely entertainment. It's exciting. And it's that fun journey of just not truly knowing what's going on that is gripping. But I do think they didn't quite deliver for me at the conclusion of season 1. And I'm still not here on season 2. So there's a lot of hype on this show right now. It is beautiful. It's great to watch. Maybe I'm stupid. I don't know. But I don't think it's quite there for me yet. I hope I can get there or maybe understand it and feel it the way that other people are feeling, because it's definitely reverberating across the culture right now. And shout out to Jessica. The last episode was definitely interesting. And even if not all the contents were perfect, the actual shot selection and some of the choices were so creative and experimental, so I did enjoy that. If there was one other thing I would throw your way, recommend you check out Doechii, this song specifically, just something about it. I'm not going to play it because I'll get demonetized on this episode, but I'll drop this in the notes. Just if you're going to check out one song from her to just understand her a bit. Denial is a River, Doechii, 1998, born the same day as me. She's a Leo, explains a lot. We all need too much attention. We're all just self-obsessed. But with that, I'll try to have some self-awareness, close this out. I hope you have a great rest of your day. See you again soon.